Okay, so we are going to start painting the apple now. We've already done 2 coats to the background. This actually only has 1 coat. If you're looking at it, this is my 2-coat one. I'm saving this for later, but I'm going to work on this one right now. What I'm going to do before I get painting is I'm going to have a plan. All right, we've got to have a plan, and today our plan is to paint the apple. So what I want to try to lay out for myself is a little bit of the colors. Now, one of the things that I was doing last time, and maybe I didn't make a big enough deal about it, is I like to kind of think of this area here as my inventory area. This is like where I can go shopping for more color, and I think this area is where I'm going to mix. So I'm trying to use the knife to kind of take from here instead of just going like, oh, I need this, so I'm just going to mix it up there. Come back here to get more paint, but then use the center area to work with. What I'm going to do is I have pure white over there. I'm going to keep that kind of pure white. I'm going to just take a little touch of yellow and kind of just add the tiniest bit to this, just to make it slightly off-white. I like to have the white out of the tube is pretty stark, and in all honesty, I think it's probably better off for some of the lighter sections to have just slightly off-white. You can always use white straight out of the tube for a really highlighted hot spot, but I'm just getting the slightest bit of color to it. I'm going to go ahead and kind of wedge that into a little pile as best I can. Like this. I'm going to grab some of the rest of this yellow with just a little bit of white, and I'm just going to kind of make another little lighter yellow. Again, I really do believe that when you start mixing a whole, where you're going to need a lot of color, when well, I'm doing a big chunk today, it's better to mix that color before you start painting, because if you need to mix a lot of a color in between, you're always dealing with drying time on your canvas. Now, if you need a little bit of something, that's where you mix on the canvas. You mix a little bit over here, however. But I'm going to make myself a slightly lighter version of this yellow over here, just so I have it kind of ready to go. I'm going to mix myself a little bit of this, and I'll take a little bit of this red. I'm going to make myself a little sort of, it's not going to be orange, but just sort of taken down from those straight red out of the tube kind of thing. A little bit of that red and that yellow. It's going to bring down the intensity of that red just a little bit, and that'll be something that I can kind of play with. And I have red out of the tube over there. I think what I also want to make, I want to make a little bit of a darker tone. So I'm going to take some red and I'll take some green. And what we talked about before was that when we mix complementary colors together, opposites, we can kind of make ourselves darker versions of it. And I grabbed a lot of green, but as I'm mixing it over here, it's really turning into like a dark burgundy, sort of muddy kind of scab red, and that'll be fine because I need to make some darker areas. When you're mixing, you can mix a little bit lighter, but you'll see later on that I'll kind of lighten up that up as I'm working. So I have a little array of colors here. I have some of the straight colors available to me. I've made sort of like a off-white, a slightly lighter yellow, a little bit of yellow and red, and some red and green over here to make the darker tone. Wipe my palette knife clean or butter knife clean. I'll put that to the side right now. And then we're going to start with the actual painting over here. For the painting, and I'm just going to grab my picture. For the painting, I'll use kind of what's happening in the picture as my sort of reference point. But just like we've done before, we're going to work from light to dark. Now, we've used flat brushes and rather large ones to kind of cover a lot of area. What we can start doing today is we can start using some of these round brushes. All right, the round brushes have these plastic tops on them. You can just kind of take those out and throw them away. Plastic tops is just to kind of keep them preserved as they're in sort of little containers and things like that, but that's one time only. The round brushes are round this way and come out to the point. It'll be a little bit closer to being like a fingertip. What I recommend over here is that, again, we're using, at any one time, we should probably be using, 2, maybe even 3 brushes at a time, and that would be like a light, when you're going from one color to the other, that step up gradation. That way you can still keep a light tone brush and a darker tone brush. The little tiny one, I don't know if it's super helpful for us right now, so I'm going to focus on just using like the medium and the large one for right now. I'm going to start with the lightest part of my picture, okay? I'm going to kind of work from light, and I'm going to work from light in here where we have that, and it kind of comes in with a little bit of the yellow and stuff like that. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of dip into my light tone, and I'm going to get in there and just start working some of that in. I think I kind of even want a little bit of more brightness in there, so I'm going to take my other brush and I'm going to get just some straight up white. I'm going to work a little straight up white into the very brightest spot of it. So I've got a little bit of regular white and a little bit of my off-white. And from here, I'm going to kind of switch over. I get my hot spot already. I'm going to switch over. I've got my regular white, and now I'm going to switch over to my little bit of yellow. Same thing. When I'm working, I'm always pulling the brush in the same direction as the handle's pulled, trying to pick up some paint. Same kind of direction and thing that I'm doing when I'm painting. You're going to find that the painting with these brushes are a little bit more like using a little bit of a fingertip. I'm going to go ahead and start sort of getting some of that color in there. And just like we've done before, we want to get a little bit of that mixing on the canvas. So now that I put down some yellow, I'm going to switch back to my lighter tone brush. And with my lighter tone brush, I'm able to kind of come back in into light areas, and I'm using that to kind of mix my white and bright color into my sort of medium color. And where it ends up being a little bit too bright, I'll come back with a little bit of my darker color. I'm going to work some of this in. I'm going to work a bunch of it in because I want all this to stay wet, and I want to be able to sort of transition over to the red really quickly. I went ahead and I'm using the edge of that brush. You can see how I'm using it to kind of make that crisp, clean edge of the apple on the page. And I know that there's a lot of yellow on here and not really a ton of yellow in the painting, but that's okay because I'm going to mix some of that into one another. So I've got my sort of yellow tones, got them mixed into my white. We can leave little brush marks in there and we want to see a painting, so it's okay to have brush strokes in there. We don't have to blend it completely out, but you obviously know how to blend it. And I've got my two colors over here. I'm gonna switch on over now to bringing in a little of that red, and I'll go with another round brush. Let's grab my machine. I'm gonna start getting a little bit of that red. Kind of make a little transition color first, and then I'm going to come in and try to work a little bit of that into the wet paint. And the beauty of having everything wet at the same time means that as I'm working over here, I'm kind of mixing a little bit of the two into one another. And that's what we want. We want those in-between shades that can only happen when the two of these things are sort of touching one another. Now, texture, the apple skin, the spottiness, the irregularity, it all kind of works in our favor. So I'm going to kind of make some of my little marks in here, and I'm going to let a little bit of what's on my brush kind of touch into those other colors. And I don't want to blend it out completely. I don't want to lose that yellow creeping through, ripening towards the red. See how I've worked a little bit of that in. If it ends up becoming a little too red for you in places, just come back with your yellow brush, and you can see how I'm holding my other brushes in the other hand. I'm ready to go and ready to switch up on a moment's notice. And I can use this to kind of blend a little bit. I can use to kind of make some of those tones, but none of this stuff, this cross mixing and everything, none of that stuff happens unless my canvas and my palette is like wet and ready to go. And I'm not going to ignore the area up top over here since I have a lot of the same colors going on, and these are the colors that I'm working with right now. I'll kind of play with them as we're working. So I'm going to use that to kind of make a little bit of my edge of the top of the apple. And don't worry, we'll come back and we can add that little stem anytime. I'm going to start working a little bit more of this red into there. What I'm going to do is I got to work it into the color that's already in there. Otherwise, stuff is all going to start drying. Start getting that little bit of dry brush. Stuff's been out for 10-15 minutes. Add a little bit of water onto your palette. Work it into the paint. I've added a bunch over here. Looks like my transition right here is getting a little rough. So what do? Grab my brush with the lighter color and I sort of play mixing some of that in there. Take a little bit of my yellow. Now if you're just doing this with all one brush, what's going to end up happening is you're going to have like a big mixing mess, and it'll all be dark, and then all you're doing is making the areas a little bit darker. Switching, you can notice that I'm switching back and forth often. Grab my red and slather some of that on. See, I got some lighter areas in the middle over here. I'm going to come back and I'm going to put down some of that lighter tone. See, I actually kind of have like a little bit of pink in there, so I'm going to take my white brush and just smear a little bit of that in there. Work a little bit of that into there, and then come back to my just white brush and kind of play. And again, you're going to have to find that happy medium of being like confident and quick. And I think I wrote the other day about online about be quick, not fast. I think fast is sometimes a little bit sloppy. I think quick is confident. You know what you're doing. Now, this is the first painting you're doing, so you're going to have to fake that a little bit, but this first round of painting it is going to be a little bit of just playing and kind of getting comfortable with the process. Anything you don't like, just paint right over it. Let it dry, and we'll come back again at it tomorrow. The side of the apple starts getting really darker. And I think you see when I put down that flat color that's been mixed without it sort of touching or being co-mixed in with the other stuff that's on my canvas, it looks very flat at first until we get it sort of worked in to the other things that are happening here. We're starting to get to area of this thing where we're going to get a little bit darker. Well, at this point, we are running out of bright apple, and now we're getting into the shaded area. So what I'm going to do is, it's all going to be red. I'm going to find making things darker tends to be fairly easy. Making things lighter, you really have to kind of repaint things later on. I'm going to use my brush and really kind of just drag the edge around and try to cover this side and cover it quickly. I probably should have used a slightly larger brush for this part, but listen. Live and learn. Got my red side, and now what I think I want to do is I want to bring in, and you see how I'm holding, I'm going to bring in another brush, and this is where I'm going to get into my sort of dark red, a little bit of that red, and I'm going to kind of start working a little bit of that in to my sort of shaded areas. And this is only achievable with a lot of that wet paint already on the canvas. What I'm getting to do over here is kind of just basically working in some of that darker shade, the green and red mixture that I put together. Just kind of working a little bit of that into the wet paint that I already have. Just trying to my strokes, you know, keep the edge kind of clean. I'll work that into painting. And I'm going to keep adding a little bit more. And kind of look at the shaded, dark, you know, sort of low point in the picture kind of happens in there. Work it in. I'm going to switch back to my smaller red brush and kind of work a little bit of that in there to keep my brush strokes kind of consistent. And I want to go even darker in here. All right. I don't have another smaller brush to switch over to. I'm going to stick with this one. I'm going to grab a little bit of my paint, and then I'm going to go into my green again. I'm going to grab a lot more green, and I'm going to go in and just kind of come and get that real muddy, dark red shadow in there. I'm going to try to work it into my painting while my painting is still all real wet. And the real thing about this one is kind of working in a quick, confident manner that lets you work all that paint into one another. And you know, we're not going to go for like this smooth, polished apple skin. What we want to get is we want to see a little bit of that, you know, a painterly touch. And this is a place where we can kind of experiment with that and make the mistakes. And one of the things that's about the one that we're doing right now is that, hey, listen, if you don't like this and the way it's turning out right now, hey, listen, finish your apple today, let it dry, and then just paint over it tomorrow. At the end of the world. I'm going to continue to pick up a little bit more darkness, almost just straight up green, and I'm just adding a little bit of that green into there, into that sort of shaded, really dark. And the more value I bring into this, the more depth I'll create, and the more sort of realism we'll get. And I'll play with that a little bit more. I think I kind of get a little bit of a highlight in here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get a little bit of my light color. Brush has been sitting for a sec. Add a little bit of water. Grab a little bit of that red. I'll come in and I'll work a little like reflective shine into this thing. Just again, you want to kind of pick up a little bit of paint that's already on there, and the only way this works is wet to wet. It's been a minute since I've done any sort of painting, but I'm kind of feeling my little apple here. Just taking a little touch of some almost straight up green with a little bit of that red. These things are starting to dry. Come in here and just even try to darken that up just a little bit more. A couple dark marks in here while it's all still wet. And just kind of just play with it just a little bit before it's completely settled. Once this thing starts to feel like Velcro and your brush is just sticking to it, well, you're pretty much then kind of done for the day. And our goal right now is to get this whole thing covered in paint, a nice edge in around it. If you didn't quite get the look that you wanted today, it didn't sort of work the way you wanted, it's okay. Let it dry, come back tomorrow, we'll attack it again. still painting, working with my paint. It's all still a little dry. Alright, I think that's really it for my apple for today. I'm going to let this dry. If I want to kind of repaint it tomorrow, I'm going to leave it be. If I am, you know, feeling real good about it. And now I'll get my little thin brush and I'll go into my little whites and cream. Take a little bit of yellow. I'll brush a little bit, not too much white on there. A little bit of my yellow. Go in here, grab a little bit of this red and a little bit of this green, and take the tiniest bit of white. Look at my red, green, and white. Just kind of give me a little bit of a brown color. I don't like the brown. Grab a little bit of that golden color. Get my sort of dark red blood color. A little more green into it. Try to make it a little dark. And voila. First apple of the day.